She was invisible to most, just another homeless woman surviving the cold, her world reduced to the noise of footsteps and whispers on unforgiving streets. But on one ordinary day, something shifted. Amid the blur of strangers rushing past, she heard a fragment of words, quiet, dangerous, and not meant for her ears. Words that carried weight, power, and a secret that could change everything. What followed was no accident. In the shadows of wealth and power, her presence was never supposed to matter. Yet in that moment, her very existence stood between silence and survival. She didn't choose to be part of this story, but fate had already written her into it. A woman society dismissed, a man wearing the stars of a nation's highest honor, and a truth that should never have been spoken aloud. How could someone with nothing risk everything to save a man who had everything? This is not just her fight. It is ours. The city never slept, but for her, its noise was nothing more than a constant reminder of how invisible she had become. Cars roared past, people hurried to destinations that were never hers, and the world moved forward as if she no longer existed within it. Her name was Naomi. Once, it was spoken with warmth, with laughter, with belonging. Now, it was lost in the shuffle of crowded sidewalks and cold nights. Naomi had not always been homeless. She once held a job at a small diner, pouring coffee and trading small jokes with the regulars. She once had a room, a space of her own where the door locked, and she could rest without fear. But life has a way of erasing security quickly, and in her case, one hardship after another pushed her further toward the margins. A lost job, medical bills she couldn't pay, the absence of anyone who could catch her before she fell. Before long, she was surviving on corners, wrapping herself in worn blankets, and clutching the few belongings she still owned. Yet what defined Naomi wasn't her loss. It was the resilience she carried in silence. She still woke each morning, searching for scraps of hope as much as scraps of food. She listened, always listened. On streets where no one looked her in the eye, she heard everything. Conversations that brushed past her as though she were air, secrets spilled into phones, careless whispers of people who never realized she was paying attention. To them, she was nobody. But Naomi noticed everything. There was a place she often sat, near a busy intersection where soldiers sometimes passed in their crisp uniforms. She admired them quietly, their certainty, their pride, the way they seemed untouchable. For her, those uniforms symbolized stability, power, and belonging, everything she had been denied. She never spoke to them, of course. Why would they notice her? Still, she watched. And she waited. Not for anything specific, but because the streets had taught her that every moment carried possibility, sometimes cruel, sometimes miraculous. On the day it all began, nothing seemed different. The sky was heavy with clouds, the kind that threatened rain but never delivered it. Naomi pulled her jacket tighter, its frayed edges unable to keep out the chill. She shifted her backpack, the one thing she guarded with her life, even though inside it held little more than memories, old photographs, a few crumpled notes, a Bible worn thin from years of turning pages in the dark. As people rushed around her, Naomi focused on surviving another day. Would she find food? Would she make it through the night without being harassed or forced to move? These were her normal thoughts, her normal life. Survival. Endurance. Waiting for tomorrow. But hidden in the rhythm of that ordinary day was something extraordinary. A ripple, faint at first, that would soon tear through her life with the force of a storm. She didn't notice the black car parked just down the block. She didn't see the man in a tailored suit checking his watch, glancing over his shoulder, then leaning toward another figure with hushed urgency. She didn't recognize the decorated officer stepping out moments later, the 4 stars on his shoulder marking him as one of the most powerful men in the military. To her, they were just more faces in a crowd she was never part of. But her ears caught everything. And that day, they caught something she was never meant to hear. It began with words so casual they almost slipped past her. But Naomi had learned that danger often wore the mask of ordinary conversation. A stray sentence, a tone sharpened by fear, a name spoken too softly, all could signal more than it seemed. And this time, it did. She didn't yet know the weight of what she had heard, or how it would place her in the crosshairs of a story bigger than anything she had lived before. All she knew was that something in her chest tightened, a sense she could not explain. The streets had taught her survival instincts, and every part of her was now on edge. For the first time in a long time, Naomi's life was not about surviving the next meal or the next night. It was about something far greater. She just didn't realize it yet. Because what she had stumbled upon wasn't just dangerous. It was deadly. And the choice she would soon face would test not only her courage, but the conscience of an entire nation. Naomi had always trusted her instincts. On the streets, instincts were survival. They told her when to move, when to keep her head down, when danger was coming before it arrived. That day, her instincts screamed louder than ever before. The words she overheard weren't meant for her. They were muttered sharply, clipped and calculated. She caught fragments, just enough to understand that what was being planned wasn't small, wasn't harmless, and certainly wasn't something the public was supposed to know. A general. A meeting. A phrase that stuck in her chest like a thorn. He won't see it coming. She froze where she sat on the corner, staring at the cracked sidewalk as if the ground itself had betrayed her. Did she mishear? Was her mind twisting casual words into something more sinister? But no, Naomi had lived too long on the margins to mistake the tone of secrecy, the weight of danger. And then she saw him. The man stepping out of the black car, uniform pristine, for silver stars gleaming on his shoulders. He carried himself with the gravity of someone who had seen battle, who had commanded thousands, who lived in a world far removed from her own. A 4-star general, standing within feet of her. And without realizing it, he was walking into the very danger she had just overheard. Naomi's heart pounded. Her first instinct was to look away, to shrink back into invisibility. That was what the world expected from her. To remain unseen, unheard, forgotten. But as the general passed, as the suited men leaned closer, whispering words they thought vanished into the air, Naomi knew she couldn't unhear them. The dilemma struck her immediately. What was she supposed to do? Who would believe her? A homeless black woman, ragged clothes hanging off her frame, standing on a street corner with nothing but a backpack of memories. She knew how people saw her, lazy, dangerous, untrustworthy. She had heard the insults whispered, or sometimes shouted, in her direction. She had felt the disgust in the eyes of passers-by who clutched their purses tighter, who crossed the street to avoid her. And now, she carried knowledge that could save a man who likely never once noticed her existence. Naomi tried to steady her breathing. Her eyes darted to the general again. He looked strong, confident, but there was something tragic about it. He had no idea that shadows were closing in around him. She thought about walking away. It would be easier, safer. This wasn't her fight. Why risk everything for a stranger who, like everyone else, might dismiss her as worthless? But a voice inside her, small, trembling, yet fierce, whispered back, "If not you, then who?" That night, sleep refused to come. She huddled beneath her thin blanket, the city's cold cutting through her bones. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard those words again, "He won't see it coming." Over and over, until her chest ached. By morning, she made her choice. She had to try. But trying meant stepping into a world that had always shut its doors to her. The military, the police, government officials, she knew their history with people like her. Especially with people who looked like her. A black woman without a home, without credibility, claiming she overheard a plot. At best, they would laugh at her. At worst, they would call her delusional, dangerous, maybe even lock her up for making threats. Still, she couldn't shake the weight of responsibility. She decided to find a way to reach the general directly. The first attempt was a disaster. She approached the gates of a nearby military office, clutching her backpack tightly. Her voice shook as she asked to speak with someone, anyone, about what she had overheard. The guard barely looked at her before cutting her off. "Move along, ma'am. This is restricted." She tried again, desperation rising in her throat. "Please, I heard something. Something about." The guard's eyes hardened. His hand drifted toward the weapon at his side. I said move along. Naomi stepped back, shame burning her face. People nearby glanced at her, then quickly turned away. She could hear their thoughts, another crazy homeless woman. The rejection stung, but worse was the fear that she was running out of time. Days passed, and the whispers around her seemed to grow louder. She caught glimpses of the suited men again, same car, same sharp glances. She began to wonder if they noticed her watching. If they suspected she had heard too much. The paranoia wrapped tighter around her chest. Every footstep behind her, every car slowing down near the curb, every shadow felt like a threat. Yet she kept moving, kept searching for another chance. Then, it came. One morning, Naomi saw him again, the general. He was walking into a hotel, flanked by aides, his face etched with the kind of tired dignity only men who carried secrets wore. She hesitated only for a second before rushing forward. Her voice cracked through the noise of the city. Sir. General, wait. Heads turned. People frowned. The aide stiffened immediately, moving to block her path. Naomi's heart pounded as she raised her hands, showing she meant no harm. Please. You're in danger. I heard them, I heard what they're planning. You can't ignore me. The general paused, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Naomi thought he might actually listen. But then, his aide stepped closer, sneering down at her. Get her out of here, he barked. Within seconds, she was shoved aside, her words swallowed by the indifference of power. The humiliation was crushing. People stared, whispering, pointing. To them, it was just another scene, another unstable woman causing a spectacle. They would forget her in minutes. But she couldn't forget. She couldn't walk away. Because now, she knew for certain, they weren't going to let her be heard. And that meant she had to make them listen. As the days blurred together, the tension only grew. Naomi noticed strange patterns. Cars idling longer than necessary near her corner. Men in suits who seemed to glance at her just a little too long. Once, she returned to her usual spot to find her belongings rifled through, her backpack unzipped, though nothing was stolen. It was a warning. Her pulse quickened at every noise. She barely slept, always afraid she would wake to a hand on her shoulder, a voice in the dark. And yet, she kept moving. Kept following the threads no one else could see. One evening, she overheard another conversation, this time in an alley behind a restaurant. The words made her blood run cold. Tomorrow night. The hotel. Make sure he doesn't leave alive. Her breath caught. There was no more time. Naomi had a choice, stay silent, protect herself, and let a man die, or act. She chose to act. The next sequence unfolded like a storm. Naomi ran through the streets, desperation fueling her legs. She knew where the general would be, the same hotel, the same schedule. She had seen him there before. And now, she had one chance to reach him. But fear gnawed at her. Not fear of failure, fear of what would happen if she succeeded. If she drew too much attention. If the wrong people realized how much she knew. Still, she pressed on. When she arrived at the hotel, security was already heavy. Men in suits scanned the crowd, radios crackling. Naomi stood at the edge of the sidewalk, heart hammering, sweat cold against her skin. She couldn't just walk up to him, not this time. She had to be smarter. As she scanned the crowd, she noticed something off. A man loitering near the entrance, his jacket too heavy for the weather, his eyes darting nervously. Her instinct screamed again. That was no ordinary bystander. She realized in an instant, the danger wasn't hours away. It was here. Now. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She pushed through the crowd, her voice rising above the noise. General. Look out. Heads turned, confusion rippling like a wave. The man near the entrance tensed, hands sliding into his jacket. And in that split second, Naomi knew she had done the unthinkable. she had made herself the center of everything. The world that had ignored her was now staring. The shadows that had hunted her were now exposed. And the general's life, balanced on the edge of her next breath. The street outside the hotel erupted in chaos. Naomi's scream had cut through the noise like a siren, freezing the moment in unbearable tension. The general turned instinctively, his eyes locking on her just as the man near the entrance reached inside his jacket. Time slowed. Naomi's legs moved before her mind caught up. She lunged forward, shoving past startled onlookers, her voice cracking with urgency. "He's armed. He's going to." But even as the words left her throat, the world reminded her who she was. Security surged, not toward the man with the jacket, but toward Naomi. Within seconds, hands clamped around her arms, rough and unyielding. She was dragged backward, her protests drowned by accusations. "Get her down. She's a threat." Her chest burned as she gasped for air. "Not me. Him, look at him." She tried to twist, to point, but her wrists were already yanked behind her. The metal bite of handcuffs locked around her skin. The man in the jacket smirked, just for a moment, before slipping into the panicked crowd. No one saw it but her. Naomi screamed again, her voice hoarse. "You're letting him get away. He's going after the general." But her words, like so many times before, were swallowed by disbelief. The humiliation struck deeper than the pain in her wrists. Cameras were out now, phones lifted high. To the strangers watching, it was a spectacle. A homeless black woman tackled outside a hotel, dragged across the pavement as she wailed incoherently about a danger no one else could see. She caught fragments of their murmurs. "Another crazy one. She's probably high. Why do they always cause scenes?" Each word was a blade. They didn't see her fear, her desperation. They didn't see the truth. All they saw was the skin she lived in, the clothes she wore, the image they had already decided she fit. And in those crucial seconds, the real danger walked free. Inside the hotel, the general's schedule pressed on. He was ushered through the lobby, surrounded by aides and guards who assured him it was under control. He glanced once toward the commotion outside, his expression hard, dismissive. He didn't recognize Naomi, didn't hear her words. To him, she was just another disruption. Naomi fought against the grip of the officers holding her down, tears streaking her face. "You don't understand. He's going to kill him. You have to believe me." But the response was the same sneer she had lived with all her life. "Enough. You people are always causing trouble." Those words hit harder than the pavement beneath her. You people. 2 words that reduced her entire existence to a stereotype, that dismissed her humanity as easily as swatting a fly. Her mind spiraled. Was this how it would end? Silenced, ignored, punished, for daring to speak? Minutes passed like hours. She was hauled into the back of a police vehicle, her wrists aching, her breath ragged. Through the barred window, she could still see the hotel entrance, the stream of officials moving in and out. And somewhere among them, the man in the jacket. Her stomach twisted. She wasn't just silenced, she was being erased from the story unfolding before her. But then, screams. Sharp, piercing, unmistakable. The crack of glass shattering. Chaos inside the hotel spilled outward, and Naomi's chest clenched with terror. She had been right. The next moments blurred into a nightmare. Officers scrambled from the car, radios erupting with panic. Naomi pressed her face against the cold glass, desperate to see. All she caught were flashes, people running, a stretcher being rushed forward, voices shouting over one another. And then she saw him, the general. His uniform torn, his face pale, carried out by 2 guards. Blood streaked his sleeve. Naomi's breath caught. She slammed her fists against the window. I told you this would happen. But no one turned. No one acknowledged her. The weight of injustice crushed her chest. She had known, she had warned, she had risked everything, and still, she was nothing more than noise in the background of a story that was never supposed to include her. Hours later, Naomi sat in an interrogation room. The cuffs were gone, but her wrists still bore angry red marks. The room was stark, the buzzing light above her flickering like it might burn out at any moment. Across the table sat two men in suits, their eyes cold and calculating. "Tell us again," one said, his tone sharp. "Exactly what you claim you heard." Naomi's voice shook, but she repeated the fragments. The whispers, the phrases, the man in the jacket. She pleaded for them to understand. "I tried to stop it. I tried to warn him. You have to believe me." Silence stretched. One man scribbled notes. The other leaned back, lips curling with disdain. Finally, the first spoke. "So, let me get this straight. A homeless woman, who admits she has no job, no stable residence, no credibility, just happened to overhear a conspiracy to assassinate a 4-star general?" His words dripped with mockery. Naomi swallowed hard, fighting the urge to break. "Yes. Because people like you never see me. That's why they spoke near me. Because I'm invisible." The man scoffed. "Invisible, or unstable?" The second leaned forward, his voice low, dangerous. "You're lucky you're not being charged for obstruction. If we let every street person spin their delusions into accusations, the system would collapse. Be grateful we don't put you in jail for wasting our time." Naomi's chest caved. The truth was right there, painted in blood on the general's uniform, and still, she was dismissed. But the story wasn't finished. Because outside that room, evidence began to surface. A camera caught part of the scuffle at the hotel. A witness reported seeing a man flee through a side exit. And Naomi's desperate screams, captured on bystanders' phones, circulated online. Her words, her warnings, her struggle against the officers. Suddenly, the world could see what the officials had ignored. And it sparked outrage. The climax wasn't just Naomi's fight to be heard, it was the collision of perception and truth. A black woman's society had cast aside, had risked everything to save a man who had everything, and in the process, exposed the cruelty of a system that silenced her at every turn. The injustice was undeniable. She had been handcuffed while the real threat slipped away. She had been mocked while blood was spilled. She had been invisible until her voice was forced into the light. And now, everyone was watching. Naomi sat in the interrogation room as her fate hung in the balance. The officers' voices echoed, unstable, troublemaker, nobody. Yet, beyond those walls, the truth was spreading. For the first time in a long time, Naomi felt something stir in her chest, not just fear, not just anger, but a glimmer of defiance. She raised her head, meeting their eyes. Her voice was steady, unshakable. "You can ignore me. You can call me names. But you can't erase the truth. I was right. And deep down, you know it." The room went silent. And in that silence, Naomi realized, the fight wasn't over. It was only beginning. Naomi sat alone in the cold interrogation room long after the questions had stopped. The buzzing light above hummed, casting shadows across the table. Her wrist still bore the red marks from the handcuffs, each sting a reminder of how she had been silenced. For hours, she had been dismissed, accused, and mocked. Yet outside those walls, something was shifting. Her cries, her desperate warnings, the moment she was thrown to the ground, they had been captured by strangers' phones. And in a world where truth was often ignored until it was caught on camera, her invisibility was beginning to fade. The video spread quickly. People saw her warnings, saw the way she was treated, saw the blood that followed. Outrage sparked conversations that had long been avoided. Questions were asked. Why was a homeless black woman handcuffed while the real threat walked free? Why were her words ignored until it was too late? Naomi was released quietly, without apology. No press conference. No acknowledgement. To the officials, she was still no one, just a name they wouldn't remember, a body they wished would disappear. But beyond those walls, people were speaking her name. For Naomi, the impact was complicated. She walked the same streets as before, clutching her backpack, searching for food and shelter. The world hadn't suddenly offered her a home, a job, or dignity. Yet strangers now stopped her sometimes, not with the cold stares of suspicion, but with recognition. "You're the woman from the video," one whispered. "The one who tried to save him." Naomi nodded silently, unsure of what to say. To be seen was strange. To be remembered was stranger still. But she also knew that visibility came with risk. Not everyone praised her. Some blamed her, accused her of exaggerating, of causing chaos. Online comments tore into her character. "She's just looking for attention. She probably made it up." Another black woman playing the victim. The same dismissal, now amplified for the world to see. And yet, she carried herself differently. Because for the first time, she had proof that her existence mattered. She had fought to be heard, and though she was nearly erased, the truth had broken through. The general survived. The wound scarred, but he lived to stand again in uniform. Reports framed the incident carefully: a foiled attempt, a disruption, authorities intervened. His name was preserved with honor. Hers, however, was left on the margins. Naomi didn't expect gratitude. She didn't expect medals or speeches. What she wanted was simple: acknowledgement. A recognition that even though society pushes aside carry value, carry truth, carry power. But the silence from the institutions was deafening. And that silence spoke louder than any words. For those watching Naomi's story unfold, the impact stretched beyond her. People saw the way she was treated not as an isolated mistake, but as a reflection of something much deeper. They recognized the pattern: how black voices, especially women's voices, are too often dismissed, doubted, and discredited. It wasn't just Naomi. It was a story repeated across generations. Black mothers begging officers to listen before tragedy strikes. Black men pleading their innocence only to be silenced by cuffs. Black women labeled as angry, unstable, troublemakers whenever they dare to speak truth. Naomi's humiliation wasn't unique. It was systemic. And that realization forced a question too heavy to ignore: how many times must the unheard be proven right before they are believed? Naomi continued her life much as before, but something inside her had changed. She no longer carried only the weight of survival. She carried a truth that had pierced through indifference, if only for a moment. She had risked everything for a man who never saw her, and in doing so, she exposed a reality the world prefers to look away from. Every night, when she clutched her worn backpack and tried to sleep beneath the city's indifferent glow, she replayed it all: the whispers, the warning, the cuffs, the blood. It was a story she could never escape, because it wasn't just her story. It was the story of millions living unseen, unheard, unprotected. And yet, within her chest, the spark of defiance refused to die. She whispered to herself sometimes, when the nights were especially long, "I was right. I mattered. I still matter." The larger meaning of Naomi's story is impossible to ignore. It forces us to confront the ways racism strips people of credibility, humanity, and safety. It shows us how easy it is to dismiss someone based on appearance, circumstance, or color. It reveals the cost of ignoring voices at the margins, not just to them, but to all of us. Because what if Naomi hadn't screamed? What if she had chosen silence? What if, like the world expected, she had faded into invisibility that day? The general might not have lived. The truth might have never surfaced. And that is the lesson: justice often hinges on the voices we are quickest to dismiss. So the question lingers, pressing against the conscience of everyone who hears her story. How many more Naomis will be silenced before we finally listen? How many truths will be ignored, denied, erased, because they come from those society deems unworthy? And how long will we allow a system built on indifference to decide who gets to be believed, and who gets to be forgotten? Naomi's story does not end neatly. She remains on the streets, fighting each day for survival. But she also remains a living reminder, a scar on the conscience of a society that chose disbelief until disbelief cost too much to ignore. Her life is proof that even the most invisible among us carry truths that matter. Proof that racism is not only about violence, but about silence. About the everyday refusal to hear, to see, to acknowledge. And so, as her story closes, the responsibility shifts to us. To listen when it's uncomfortable. To believe when it's inconvenient. To act before it's too late. Because Naomi's fight was not just hers. It is ours. This isn't just her story, it's a mirror held up to ours. The only question left is, the next time a voice cries out, will we finally hear it?